Hello, everybody, and welcome to College Access Today. I'm Dr. Pamela Donnelly. Today's edition, what do we mean when we speak of college access? This is a linguistic conversation, but it's one that I think is going to really help everyone to get our act together in terms of how we're talking about this very important construct that gets tossed around left and right. College access. In order to think effectively about the systemic change we need, let's make sure that we mean the same things by the words that we're using. And to that end, the information I'm about to share is going to set up a framework just to examine it. So this is sort of dedicated to other word nerds like me, and I invite you to just use your critical thinking skills. So as we think about what is the reality and how are we speaking of reality, let's remember that there is a relationship between models of reality and the reality itself. Now, this has been well explored by scholars. In fact, there was one scholar named Alfred Korzybski. Did I say that right? Korzybski. I might have said it wrong. Anyway, he theorized that what he called the map of language cannot fully denote the real terrain of complex constructs. The map is not the terrain. And now if you think about that metaphor, it's pretty brilliant. When we say things, what we're saying has a meaning, but everyone may interpret those meanings differently. And the actual terrain, you can have a map, but the map may not show you where there's a pothole and a bunch of quicksand. And only through understanding the terrain can we actually increase equitable access to higher education in the US. So this phrase has actually, I think, become problematic, which is why I'm taking a moment to break it down in this video. So any meaning that is assigned to a complex construct like college access, it does tend to be context dependent. And so we're going to try to guard against these confusing mental models of reality. And the way we're going to do that is to just examine the linguistics here. So I'm going to break down the etymology of these words, first college, then access, and then the college access phrase with a little call to action at the end for you. So you can really see why this matters, because it does. Make no mistake. This matters to you. This matters to your neighbor. This matters to this country. This matters to the economic future of the United States of America. And that is something that is absolutely proven in a lot of the research out there that I have been deep diving into throughout my career in this space. So let's start with the word college. Did you know that this goes all the way back to the 14th century? So there was a Latin word collegium, and that was the antecedent. And this came from a prefix, which is call, meaning together with, and a root word, legare, meaning to depute, to send an emissary or to choose. So like a deputy, right? You're sending a deputy or an emissary, or you're choosing someone to go together with. That is what college etymologically means. Now, this word described an organized association of men, and yes, it was only men, it was the 14th century. They were endowed with certain powers as a result of the prescribed pursuit of a specific tract of education. And implicit in this was the establishment of two camps, right? There are those in the collegium and those outside of it. The us versus them nature of the haves and the have-nots has been argued to lie at the root of much of the civil unrest here in the United States related to higher education access by numerous researchers. So one way that we can assess structural usage of a word or phrase is to note that the synonyms that they're using may or may not always mean exactly the same thing. So what about words like institute, organization, academy? These kinds of words kind of mean the same thing, but they're used synonymously. And again, the semantic clarity it's actually not there. It's pretty fuzzy. Like, what is the difference between these different things? There are ways that you can think of it. And university is a really interesting word, because if you think about university, well, what is the difference? Well, the word university predates the word college by over 100 years. In fact, it goes all the way back to 1250. So in that word, universis in Latin literally means turned into one, right? So those related words that also have that universis root word are things like varsity. I mean, we've all heard the word varsity. These come from that same root. And this connotes someone or something related to the institution. Now, over time in the US and in England, there's really been a tendency to think of university and college as the same thing. But isn't it interesting that we never talk about university access? We talk about college access. Why is that our default language? This is a phenomenon, and it's interesting to think about how that ties together with the etymology of the word access itself, which, did you know, dates back to the 17th century. And this is long after college and university were being used pretty typically. So access is derived from a Latin word as well, accessus. The verb accidere denotes to approach. So I'm gonna say that again. The Latin word that access comes from talks about approaching, to approach. Notably, this does not mean to get in. It does not mean to be able to persist successfully. Certainly doesn't mean to afford. It just means to approach. When you put college and access together, I really want to encourage us to start noticing how this construct shows up in our media, in educational and corporate and nonprofit communications. I mean, it is so interesting the way that questions are posed and imperatives are stated. What is emphasized? What is the story that they're trying to tell? Is it true? I would argue that in many cases, it is not. Because this idea of the well-worn concept, the most common trope that we've all heard again and again is the American dream. And quite frankly, the grammatical utilization of the college access construct that I was just talking about, and the American dream as it is currently on its deathbed and needing life support, given how serious the higher educational crisis is in this country, those things don't really go together, right? You can approach this collegium, but there is still a huge gap between what is attainable, especially for students from marginalized populations, and what is absolutely out of reach. So this matters because using discourse analysis, we can assess what is happening politically and socioculturally, and we can hold folks accountable for the way that they are framing that narrative, right? We won't get fooled again, as the song says, right? We see now with the student debt crisis and the various ways that this has played out over the last several, I would say decades at least, that it is time for leadership to be held accountable to what is in the highest good for all students, regardless of their socioeconomic status. So as we increase our understanding of this history and the linguistics surrounding college access in America today, we can sharpen our pencils and get down to the much needed work of leveling the playing field. I'll see you next time.